Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this session. We're invited to mark the International Older Persons Day, recognized by the United Nations. The day was officially on Friday, 1 October, and happens annually. We are having our meeting on the 4th, which is after a weekend after the actual formal day for the recognition of older persons. You're welcome to this session. We particularly would like to welcome Honorable Commissioner Bomo from the African Commission. We'd like to welcome representatives of the government of the Kingdom of Lesotho. Ladies and gentlemen, we are all welcome. We are about to begin. All protocols observed. So for the few hours we are together, we in marking the day, the Center for Human Rights, working together with the African Commission's Working Group on Older Persons and Persons with Disabilities, thought it appropriate to use this day and this time to raise awareness of older persons as a group, as holders of rights in terms of international law in general, and particularly under the African human rights system, with the African Protocol on Older Persons. Besides creating awareness of their rights, we wanted to use this session to also recognize the governments that have taken steps towards ratification of the instrument, the African Older Persons Protocol, but in the same light, encouraging other African governments to do so. So to kick us off with today's proceedings, I'll hand over to our Executive Director, Professor Frans Viljoen, to give welcoming remarks.
Thank you very much, Matilda, and good morning, good afternoon, good day to all of our participants. We really treasure and appreciate you making yourself available for this time. We realize that people are very busy and that there are many contending demands, and we appreciate you taking the time and identifying this as an issue of priority for you in your schedule. So let me add my voice to that of Matilda to say that we are doing this event in commemoration of the International Day for Older Persons, and we do that proudly and gladly together with the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. As I think you all know, the Commission has a working group on older persons and persons who have disabilities. The rights of persons with disabilities is the focus of this working group as well. And it is essentially this working group that had initiated a process within the African Commission that culminated in the adoption of this very important protocol to the African Charter that was adopted in 2016, the protocol on the rights of older persons, the protocol to the African Charter. So for us as a center, it's really very gratifying. It's a wonderful opportunity to be here together with the Honorable Member of the Commission, Marie-Louise Abomo, who is also the chairperson of this particular working group, and together with legal officer of the African Commission, Bruno Menzan, who I can gladly say is also an alumnus of the Center for Human Rights academic programs. It is a privilege to work with you and to be with you to commemorate this day. But we do this also as an opportunity to showcase, to put the spotlight on this protocol, the protocol on the rights of older persons. Because, as I think most of our participants know, the protocol requires 15 ratifications by African Union member states, by states parties to the African Charter, to ensure its entry into force. And up to today, only 2 states have made that ratification, deposited their instruments. Lesotho, we are glad that the representative of the government of Lesotho is here today to also share with us the experience, the thinking behind the process, and then also Benin. We know that other states have taken steps. We heard about ratification by Ethiopia. We know that Malawi is in the process, but let us all remind ourselves that the relevant moment is the deposit of the instrument of ratification at the relevant entities within the African Union, the legal office, and we urge any state that had so far already done domestic processes of ratification to take the final step and ensure that the record is reflected that the instrument of ratification has been deposited. Now, the center has started with a campaign we call #AgeWithRights. And that campaign is very much trying to focus not only on the issues affecting older persons, but also on the need and the benefits of ratifying the older persons protocol by African Union member states, and specifically the African Charter. We also do so within the context of the disproportionate negative effects and human rights implications of older or old age and being an older person on women, not only in the African context. Give me a second, I'm sorry. My apologies, there was my phone ringing. I'm apologizing, Matilda. So it is not only that older persons are affected, but women are disproportionately affected, as we know. The feminization of poverty often coincides also with the feminization of old age negative detrimental effects. Therefore, within the center, this work around older persons is located in our Women's Rights Unit. It does not mean that old age issues are only exclusively related to the situation of women, but particularly in our continent, there is a certain coincidence of the issues. For that reason, I also thank our Women's Rights Unit, led by our manager of the unit, Matilda, for setting up this event, for doing the work around the ratification on the Older Persons Protocol. We thank you very much and welcome specifically our collaborators. In addition to the African Commission, we have also Rosalind Kihumba from the Help Age International. We've worked with Rosalind in many occasions, and we thank her also and the organization for their support and for our academic contributions that will come from Philip Waman and Joshua. Thank all of you for supporting this event. Essentially, the purpose of the event is, on the one hand, to celebrate the International Day, celebrate the fact that international law is increasingly engaging with the issues of older persons, but also taking stock of what the African Commission and what the ratification of the African Protocol on the Rights of Older Persons had achieved so far, what debates are ongoing, and then essentially, Matilda, I think the main purpose is to strategize, to think through ways in which more states, the energy can be galvanized, how more states can be brought into the fold, and the attempts at getting those ratifications up to 15 perhaps could be achieved. Shall we be very ambitious and say, let's make 2022 the year in which 15 ratifications can be achieved. That sounds very, very ambitious, but perhaps all working together. The idea of the center is certainly also to forge relationships with the Commission, but with civil society more broadly. It is through the energy and the enthusiasm and the collective working together of numerous civil society organizations, reinforcing the one the other, that this a very ambitious ideal may just be accomplished. On that note, let me wish us a very productive session, interesting deliberations, and galvanizing of energy towards maybe achieving that goal. Thank you again, and good day and discussion to us all.
Thank you, Prof. For that. You have nicely laid the ground for us, a nice challenge that you've set. I think we now have to create a hashtag for that, 2022 for 15 ratifications. And going into the afternoon, into the sessions, I think just to, as we think about strategies for the ratification, to also consider personally committing to that challenge of making 2022 being the year that we will achieve the 15 country ratifications to bring the document into force. So I'm now going to, before I lead us into the panel session, just wanted to take a few minutes to clarify the aspect on some of the plans that we as the center have for us to increase the ratification on the continent of the document. So as Prof has said, it's been a while since its adoption, and we still don't have the requisite number for it to have legal force. We require more countries, we require lobbying, we require advocacy that will lead to the increased ratification. And for that, as Prof has highlighted, it's important for us to partner with the right stakeholders, civil society, governments, actors in government, members of parliament, etc. And in thinking about how to most adequately get this done, get the ratifications that we need, we are in the process of putting together an advocacy plan for 2022-2023. And in that process, we realized that it's important to consult with stakeholders in the planning, in deciding what's the best way for this to happen at a regional level, as well as at a country-specific level, because each context is different. And so to help us achieve the aim of at least putting together an advocacy plan that will work for us regionally and in each country, we've designed a survey that we will distribute to the participants who are with us today and request that you complete the survey in the coming week. So the main aim the main aim for the survey for us is to just establish from the participants in different countries, in your context, what's the extent of knowledge about the existence of the protocol and its ratification, whether at a local community level or at a government level. We're looking to establish your context-specific perspective of what the relevance is of the document, because in trying to advocate for the document, we would want to speak to the needs of the local people. So in understanding how they feel the protocol would be relevant to them, we would then translate that language into the language that we use for the lobbying and the advocacy. Then the survey also looks to identify for us the stakeholders that we need to be partnering with in putting together the regional and country-specific advocacy plans. So we would when you receive the survey, you see we are requesting information on organizations that you know are working on older persons' rights generally. We are also looking at whether in your context you've identified that the specific individuals who are very instrumental in pushing for legislative reform and ratification, that kind of thing. So those are the kinds of, that's the kind of feedback that the survey seeks to obtain from the participants. And we request that you just spend a bit of time in completing the survey. We'll send it to you online. It's an electronic survey. And then with that information, we'll continue to engage with you as we develop the advocacy plan to make for the ratification going forward. So that's where we are with the survey and the plan that we have for advocacy. Interesting that I say it's an electronic survey, because the theme for this year's International Day of Older Persons is digital equality, an aspect which from just findings, you'll see that it's not been very inclusive of older persons. There's an aspect of inequality there, whether it's an issue of access, whether it's available, or just the instruments that are required for access, so which has a socioeconomic aspect linked to it. And all this culminates in a question of how do we make our societies more inclusive? How do we make it more, take away aspects of discrimination on the basis of age? And for this, the protocol has Article 3, which speaks to the need to take away discrimination and the need for equality of all ages. And so in pushing for ratification, these are aspects that, that having a legally binding instrument could advance the advocacy in the practicality of the work. So that's basically our plan for the advocacy going forward, and our request for support and collaboration. In completing the survey, indicating if you belong to an organization that can particularly be part of this campaign, just to indicate that, or if you are aware of other organizations that can play a role in the campaign we are planning, then that information is what we are looking for. So that's one aspect of the objectives of today's meeting. The other aspect of the objective today is to collectively, as we are here in the room, just come up with ideas that we can take note of as we are putting together our strategy of things that we can do or measures that we can take as civil society to push for ratification of the instrument in our country-specific context. And even as we work with the African Commission, the extent to which that they can also take steps, what kind of steps would you as experts or as people who are doing this work on the ground would have for us to take note of as we're going forward. So that's basically why we are here this morning or afternoon, depending on your context. And the way our program is set out, we'll have about an hour on just a panel discussion where we have panelists to just give us a few minutes of their reflections on things that member states can do, even where there's the ratification hasn't happened, but there's some sort of framework that's guiding policy on the older person's rights, or there may be none. And we've seen in some countries, the measures are being taken when there's no ratification of an international law instrument, but it's a best practice situation. So we'll have a panel with members giving their reflections on steps that member states can take in the short term, in the medium term, in the long term, hopefully to demonstrate that some of these things don't necessarily require moving heaven and earth. It's just a matter of a state being more considerate of being inclusive of this particular group of the population. So with that, I will lead us into the panel session. And we have 4 speakers in our panel. Each speaker will take 10 to 12 minutes. After each speaker gives their reflection, we'll have a session of questions and answers, or for questions and to the panel or to the room broadly, and interventions that people would like to make. And then that will lead us to the end of the first session of our meeting. So without any further ado, I will introduce our panel members. Our first speaker is Honorable Commissioner Marie-Louise Abomo, who's the chair of the Working Group on Older Persons and Persons with Disabilities at the African Commission. Our second speaker is Rosalind Kihumba, who is the advocacy head at Help Age. Then we'll have Philip Wamen of the University of Northampton. He's an academic who's conducted research on older persons. And also similarly, we have a researcher, Dr. Egosa, who's also going to give us his reflections based on his research in the area. So I will hand over now to Commissioner Marie-Louise Abomo.
Merci de me passer la parole, Mathilde. Merci de m'avoir invitée ici. Je suis très heureuse de participer avec vous. Cela dit, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs les représentants des États, Monsieur le directeur du Centre pour les droits de l'homme de la Faculté de droit de l'Université de Pretoria, Mesdames et Messieurs du monde académique et des organisations de la société civile, distingués participants à ce webinaire, je vous présente mes respects en vos rangs, titres et qualités. Je voudrais, avant tout propos, remercier notre partenaire sur l'organisation de cette activité, l'unité droits des femmes du Centre des droits de l'homme de l'Université de Pretoria. En effet, depuis que j'ai été élu membre de la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples, et que j'ai eu le privilège de me voir confier le leadership du groupe de travail sur les droits des personnes âgées et des personnes handicapées en Afrique, la dite unité a engagé des discussions avec moi par l'entreprise du secrétariat de la Commission afin de visiter les canevas de collaboration pour l'atteinte des objectifs que nous avons en commun. Un cadre préliminaire d'accord sur les domaines à explorer ensemble a été ainsi finalisé et je l'ai avalisé. L'un des chantiers identifiés concerne l'organisation d'activités conjointes dans ce webinaire, dans le contexte de la célébration de la Journée internationale des personnes âgées. Nous travaillons également à ce que les autres chantiers se matérialisent. Je voudrais saluer le dynamisme de cette unité qui traite la question des femmes de façon holistique, de sorte que la particularité des femmes âgées en situation de double vulnérabilité a capté son attention, d'où notre collaboration. S'agissant du webinaire de ce jour, son contexte et sa portée ayant été largement abordés dans la note conceptuelle et dans le propos introductif, je n'y reviendrai pas. Je vous invite également à vous imprégner de la déclaration du groupe de travail publiée sur le site Internet de la Commission le 1er octobre 2021 à l'occasion de la célébration de la Journée internationale des personnes âgées. La dite déclaration revient sur les défis et enjeux actuels liés aux droits des personnes âgées en Afrique, en particulier celui de la ratification du protocole. Il y a ici lieu de féliciter les États que nous pourrions appeler désormais les champions de la cause des personnes âgées qui ont ratifié le protocole. Les pays qui l'ont à ce stade signé et qui sont à peu près presque une vingtaine sont à saluer et encourager sur la voie de la ratification. Mon petit doigt m'informe d'ailleurs que nous recevrons de bonnes nouvelles d'ici la fin de l'année à ce sujet. Ce webinaire apparaît donc comme une véritable réflexion anticipatrice et orientée vers le futur, chargée d'un optimisme dont se réjouit le groupe de travail en sa qualité de porte-flambeau de l'importante campagne pour la promotion et la protection des droits des personnes âgées sur le continent, avec son objectif urgent, l'obtention des ratifications. Nous sommes projetés dans l'hypothèse qui sera réalité très vite, nous l'espérons, du protocole entré en vigueur. Que faire donc pour accompagner ces États dans la réalisation de leurs obligations découlant de la ratification de ce protocole à court, moyen et long terme? La réflexion que je vais ébaucher en esquisse de réponse à cette problématique a pour constante la prise en compte d'un élément important qui est la participation des personnes âgées dans toute action visant à promouvoir et protéger leurs droits. Je voudrais insister sur cela afin que ce soit le maître mot de la mise en œuvre du protocole. D'ailleurs, lui-même le consacre tant dans son préambule que dans divers articles. Vous conviendrez avec moi que la valeur constante dans un système démocratique protecteur des droits de chacun et de tout le monde est la participation, gage de l'appropriation et de la collaboration dans la recherche de l'atteinte des buts fixés. Il doit en être de même pour les personnes âgées bien victimes de ce qu'elles définissent elles-mêmes, je cite, comme du paternalisme sophistiqué, qui décide pour elles et sans elles. Il est primordial de les consulter. C'est pourquoi, s'agissant du court terme, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, je suggère humblement que la première action aux fins de mise en œuvre du protocole soit la mise en place d'un mécanisme visant à associer les personnes âgées à toute œuvre les concernant. De manière concrète, cela signifie créer, où il n'en existe pas, des structures associatives étatiques pour coordonner leur participation à la mise en œuvre du protocole. Cette proposition d'action est prévue au préambule du protocole qui reprend la recommandation numéro 1 figurant au paragraphe 4.1 du cadre stratégique et du plan d'action de l'Union africaine sur le vieillissement de 2002, qui évoque, je cite, le droit de s'organiser en groupe et de se faire représenter dans le but de faire valoir leurs intérêts. Par la suite, l'article 5 du protocole relatif à la prise de décision reprend également cette mesure capitale. Il s'agira ensuite d'internaliser les dispositions du protocole dans le cadre juridique national pour recevoir et rendre en droit positif ce protocole. Il faut voir à ce sujet les dispositions de l'article 2 sur les obligations des États parties. La deuxième action, mon humble point de vue, concerne la prise en compte dans le budget des États par les administrations compétentes des activités en faveur des personnes âgées. Le débat sur les priorités budgétaires est ouvert à ce propos et vous conviendrez avec moi que si les politiques nationales des États mettent au cœur de leurs interventions les droits et le bien-être des personnes âgées comme valeur importante de nos sociétés, il n'y a pas de doute que les ressources nécessaires seront dégagées pour faire en sorte que nos personnes âgées soient traitées de manière optimale, comme le prévoit le protocole. Abordant le moyen terme, nous partons de l'hypothèse selon laquelle un cadre adéquat est instauré au niveau national, comme l'exige l'article 18 du protocole. Dès lors, ma première proposition est la mise en place d'un comité de suivi de la mise en œuvre qui peut être intégré au sein d'une structure existante. Ce comité aura en charge l'évaluation des actions en cours, la détermination, l'identification des défis et autres obstacles et la formulation des recommandations nécessaires et pertinentes pour l'amélioration des politiques. À ce titre, le protocole en son article 21 prévoit un mécanisme national pour le vieillissement. Enfin, pour ce qui est du long terme et des perspectives, je suggère un partage d'expériences et de bonnes pratiques avec les partenaires extérieurs, les institutions homologues étrangères, etc. Je rappelle ensuite l'élaboration de rapports d'activité par les États et leur examen par les organes compétents de la Charte prévue à l'article 22 du protocole. La poursuite de la sensibilisation aux droits des personnes âgées en vue de l'amélioration du dispositif de protection tel que prévu à l'article 23. Tout en ne doutant pas que les intervenants qui vont suivre seront plus pointus dans leurs propositions et que les débats seront très instructifs, je m'arrête là et je vous remercie de votre aimable attention. En présentant mes excuses si mon débit a été trop rapide, c'est que j'avais peur de déborder le temps qui m'était imparti. Merci.
Thank you, Commissioner Abomo, for those reflections. I won't summarize them for now. I will ask the next speaker to take the floor. Roslyn.
Thank you very much, everyone, and all protocol observed. And I will be talking from the perspective of what we've been experiencing as we work closely with the member states, the civil society, and our older person across Africa as the protocol was being drafted. And now at this time where we are trying to strategize on how they will ratify and domesticate. And just looking at the history of the development of the protocol is that we had very few stakeholders engaged, and that was not because of the weaknesses of the AU structures of the government. It's just because of the endemic nature of financial support for the sector. that they could only utilize the available resources, but make sure that we have the legal framework that is in place. And bearing in mind on that, I would want to put across some of the suggestions that would help us move in terms of countries that have already now ratified. And one of the short-term recommendation is around popularizing the protocol and the rights and entitlement of older person, particularly at a subnational level and grassroots, targeting the various important local authority personnel and structures, but also concentrating on supporting the older person to understand their rights, but also their place in terms of citizen participation, and ensuring that they also have structures that could help them, participate meaningfully in the micro-planning processes, but also in terms of them raising their voices to demand for action, or to demand for accountability by the stakeholders. And further, it would really be good for those countries who have ratified to do a baseline status for where they are at in terms of the issues of older person in terms of their situation, but also their rights, and also looking at what is in place currently, and learning that they could have at the moment, and gaps, so that can help inform where they are, a base of where they should start from in terms of even practices, systems, legal framework, or policies that are there. Once that is done, then it will also good for them to look around, especially within Africa and across other southern, especially low-middle countries who are really doing well in the sector, just to learn what they have done better, so that it can inform the forthcoming action. The other aspect is around modifying or creating a coordination and partnership mechanism that has leadership for coordination, so that they can begin envisioning how to take forward the implementation and domestication of the protocol. And of course, the issues around lobbying for us to have adequacy in terms of financial support, and this could be more, not just the government, but also lobbying other donors who can come on board, or even private sector. In the medium term, is around using the governance structure that would have been proposed, of course working very closely with the AU to develop the implementation roadmap and the MNE framework, and issues around heightening or intensifying technical support to duty bearers, to older person, to the civil society organization, and even private sector, so that that can help up in terms of speeding up the development of the necessary system or policies, but also, for instance, the civil society and older person to keep the conversation and the demands higher on the radar at all levels. And also in terms of us having good partnership with the government, all stakeholders, to develop tools and capacity building initiatives for the various stakeholders that need to support the work. For instance, members of parliament, what can they do? The financial budgeting, when we are doing national budgeting, which tools should we use when we are undertaking various activities, let's say in education, what should we do, and also the civil society, what tools should they use in their engagement. In long term, we would hope that then we will have a sustained system, comprehensive system and packages of supportive frameworks that can really help us take the agenda of older people to a higher level where they are mainstreamed and meaningfully participating in the various public conversations. And also the issue around sustaining conversations, reporting, and actions on aging as our long-term aspect that we should focus on. Otherwise, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity, and I'm hoping that we can continue working with you. Just to mention that I have now changed my position to work within the Healthy Aging Department as the Portfolio Development and Quality Assurance Manager. And our regional representative, Carol Agego, will be focusing on working with you all in terms of ratifying ratification process, but also just the usual partnership and collaboration in the region. Thank you very much. I do appreciate, and we continue appreciating as an institution, the various opportunities we've had to collaborate with you all, and particularly the Center for Human Rights. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosalind. You've packed in quite a lot of thinking points for us there in the little time that you had. Hopefully in the next session, as we go into the groups, then we will have more time to unpack them better. I will now hand over the floor to Mr. Philip Omen. He's a lecturer at the University of Northampton who has conducted research in the area of the rights of older persons. So we'll just give him an opportunity to share his reflections.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. And let me quickly appreciate the organizers of this program. It is heartwarming to know that this issue around older persons is being taken seriously. And I also want to commend the two countries and the other two countries that have either ratified or are in the process of ratify the protocol. Well, I wouldn't want to bore us with issues around the protocol because I think we already know the current state of things. I will just go into the recommendations with a view to seeing how these four countries can better protect the right of older persons within their jurisdictions. But it is important to highlight the fact that the protocol has been described as the highest political commitment by African leaders since inception. That is what one just said in 2016, that the protocol, being the highest political commitment, should be giving practical realization, should be giving practical implementation so that it doesn't just end up as one of those ratified but useless papers. So how do these countries go about implementing this particular protocol? Where the previous speakers have highlighted some of the points I have here, but I will just go over them again. The involvement of older persons in decision-making processes that affect them. That is fundamental. People say you do not shave a man's hair in his absence. So if older persons' issues are to be resolved, they have to be consulted. Their opinions should be sought and well aggregated before any policy issue can be taken on it. This will ensure that any action or policy taken by any of these four governments would be one that will that will go down to ensuring that it will go down to specifically addressing the special needs of these people. So it is important that the government carry them along in terms of decision making. Another suggestion or intervention, whether in terms of short-term, mid-term, or long-term, I'm looking at all of them interrelatedly. Another one is the issue around establishment of older persons units in the national human rights institution of each of these countries. There should be a designated unit dedicated to issues around older persons. The sole aim or goal of that particular unit will be to collate and analyze issues around older persons, so that if any issue arises, maybe around neglect, around deprivation, the older persons know that there is a government unit that they can easily access and make complaint. The other thing we should also consider, or that the country should consider, is the issue around motivation of informal caregivers. If you look at the provisions of Article 10 of the protocol, it specifically provides that the governments, the ratified governments, should ensure that informal caregivers or family members who provide support system for older persons are encouraged. So the government should see a way, they should deploy a way to ensure that family members who take care of their older persons are motivated. They are given awards or rewards in a way as to make sure that they actually take care of these persons in a way that will better their lot. Funding of research on aging and datafication of older persons' issues. It is important. I think one of the speakers has already mentioned it. It is important that funding is provided by the government on research. Researchers should be empowered to carry out research on what older persons require, what are their needs, and how can these issues be addressed. And that feeds into the issue of datafication. There should be well-marshaled out data collection and analysis around older persons. The UN recently mentioned that the older persons are chronically invisible when it comes to data availability across the world. That should it be. These 4 countries we're talking about should dedicate a specific amount of money and resources, human resources, towards ensuring that issues around older persons are well put into data and analyzed with a view to coming up with good policies that will better the lives of these persons. I also have suggested that private initiative should be encouraged. The government should encourage private sector to drive the implementation of the protocol. This could come in various ways. For example, in the University of Macedonia in Greece recently established what they called fast heroes. Fast heroes are like clubs in primary and secondary schools, well established for the purposes of training the younger ones, the children, the grandchildren, on how to take care of their grandparents. It focuses essentially on stroke prevention. They teach those children how to know that their parents or their grandparents are suffering from stroke and what to do in the event that, stroke affects them. Such things should also be encouraged by this government. Schools should be encouraged to set up clubs among youngsters with a view to also using them as a medium to protect the rights and lives of older persons. One other thing is the establishment of geriatric daycare and health centers. Just as we have daycare for younger children, we should also have geriatric centers that is solely dedicated to the welfare of older persons, where they could go to meet with their contemporaries, share ideas, and have this sense of social belonging. It is a social capital that the governments should consider. The International Day of Older Person has been given the theme Digital Equality for All Ages. In that regard, I am suggesting that these 4 countries should come up with what I have termed Telecare. Telecare is a mechanism whereby the government would give money, little resources to older persons in order to eliminate digital poverty among them. They remain digitally poor by reports. So, and COVID-19 has actually worsened their situation. The government should see how they can be empowered, and this will feed into their well-being, into their head, because if they are given this money, they will be able to have access to the internet, have access to phones, and that will lead to elimination of loneliness among them. They will be able to reach out to their friends and family members. Then the other thing is accessibility to buildings. Just as we have reasonable adjustments for people with disability. In our previous paper we presented at the conference, we mentioned that old age is a disability. That was our argument, that disability is capable of being stretched to include older persons. And if that is the case, there should be mechanisms to ensure that older persons are able to access buildings. Infrastructure should be put in place, like assistive devices, to make sure that they are able to access buildings because of their old age. The national, international, and regional cooperation is important. This is not something that can be done only at the national level. These 4 governments, you see how they can leverage on international cooperation and regional cooperation, talking about the African Union. Because, like we argued in one of our papers, the historical the historical events talking about colonialism has impacted on how the people in the developing world are able to meet the socio-economic rights of those persons living in the place. So older persons in developing countries should have their rights protected by their governments, exploring the normative framework around international cooperation. The developed countries have a legal obligation under the International Convention on Economic and Social Rights to assist the developing countries with a view to meeting or realizing the socioeconomic rights of those persons in the third world. So it is my suggestion that these governments should see how they can explore and deploy international and regional cooperation. Maybe the last thing I will simply state is that there should be a synergy between researchers, activists that are on older persons issues, and policymakers. Let there be no disconnect. The researchers working on older persons issues should work alongside the activists like the Age with Rights and the government, so that at the end of the day, the research will feed into the practical realization of those rights in terms of policy making and implementation. I think at that level, I will stop. If there is any question, I will answer it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philip. Also quite thought-provoking. I like the suggestion around telecare and making funds available to enable older persons to access digital services. Something to carry forward when we discuss into. So with that, I'll give the floor to our last speaker, Dr. Igosha. He's from the University of Derby in the United Kingdom. He also speaks from the perspective of a researcher in this area.
Okay. Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to present at this very, very important workshop. As my colleague, Mr. Owame has said as well, we currently working on a paper together on the relevance of the protocol. So I'm going to focus on just 3 areas. I'm going to focus on the role of the judiciary, lack of political will, and the development of national laws. So to me, I believe these are some of the major challenges that's going to affect the proper implementation and successful domestication of the protocol on older persons. Because in a way, by having a protocol on older persons, does that automatically mean that everything's going to be all right? Does that mean that if countries ratify, domesticate, or incorporate the protocol into their national laws, that overnight the older people, all their problems are going to be resolved? So I think there are still going to be some challenges, even with if there's going to be a successful ratification, there are going to be structural challenges that we as researchers, we as the policymakers or relevant stakeholders should also think about. And if you also look at the successful application of the African Charter, no matter how successful the African Charter is, it still has a lot of obstacles and challenges. So I've selected the role of judiciary, lack of political will, and development of national laws as potential areas that we need to think about in trying to make this protocol successful. I'll just read through some of the things I've got. National and regional courts in Africa should adopt a liberal approach to the rights of older persons. Reports indicate that some African countries, such as South Africa, that have right-based and institutionalized social safety nets, we are quicker to provide social assistance to address COVID-19 effects than other African countries with a weak form of normative framing. So it's arguable that that South African courts sympathetic approach was pro-older persons in this pandemic may attract more. It's arguable that the court's sympathetic approach was pro-older persons' rights in this pandemic period may attract both direct and symbolic impact. So African courts should borrow from the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, which recently gave an expansive interpretation to older persons' rights to health and informed consent in Poblete Vicious against Chile case. In that case, the Inter-African Court of Human Rights reasoned that failure to provide an older person with adequate and necessary medical care leading to his death violated his autonomous right to health, to which the Chilean government owed him an obligation. Also, the African Court on Human and People's Rights, the African Court should toe this Inter-American Court's line because of the influence that because of the influence of the African court's decisions could have at the domestic level in Africa. It has been noted that the African Court of Human Rights court decisions not only apply to those involved in matters, but can also be seen generally as authoritative interpretations of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, because domestic lawyers and courts in states across Africa have been using sorry. I'm just saying that the judiciary has a major role. to play in the implementation of the protocol that courts in Africa, especially sub-regional and regional courts in Africa, should take allusion from the inter-American courts and try to be very creative and try to be very liberal in their interpretation. So I also further stated that African governments should comply with the African Commission's principles and guidelines on the implementation of economic, social, and cultural rights in the African Charter on Human People's Rights, which has devoted an expansive attention to vulnerable and disadvantaged persons, including older persons. So why do we need to focus on judiciary? There's a major problem in Africa, especially with the implementation of African Courts of Human Rights: compliance. And there's been a massive backlash by some countries in Africa against the judgment given by the African Courts of Human Rights, and even judgments given by the sub-regional judiciaries in Africa. So some African states should be seen to implement and enforce decisions of the African Commission and the African Court of Human Rights. So if you are trying to say in terms of the legality, justification, and applicability of the African the protocol on older persons, and from history and from recent history, many African states are not implementing decisions of the African Court of Human Rights. So when the protocol comes into effect, when people take government to the African Courts on Human Rights, so what is the guarantee that when a decision is made, that the African courts, that the African states are going to respect the decision? So I think we need to, the judiciary has a very, very important role to play. The judiciary has to be very, very creative in trying to actualize the aims and objectives of the protocol. So furthermore, the African Court on Human Rights has been afflicted by resistance, by what people have called backlash from some states who are refusing to enforce its judgments. African states and governments should endeavor to respect and implement decisions of regional and sub-regional courts on the continent. This is particularly important because the African Court of Human Rights is set to be the only, in quote, functioning, full-fledged judicial organ of the African Union. So compliance is a very, very major issue afflicting the African Commission and African Court of Human People's Rights. According to Professor Chinwe, in one of our recent publications, she said that the African Court has a serious non-compliance crisis. About 75% of states in Africa do not comply with the decisions of the African Court on Human Rights, and there are no inbuilt consequences in the African Court of Human Rights protocol. The court's orders indicate that states that fail to pay reparation amounts within a stipulated time frame will pay interest on arrears. Only one country, Burkina Faso, has fully complied with the court's judgments in this regard. So that is one of the major problems we need to think about in terms of the role of the judiciary. So that ties in with the political will of African states, of African leaders to actually implement this decision. So it doesn't just mean we need to have this protocol and the implementation, domestication is not really working properly. So going forward, how do countries domesticate and implement this treaties generally? In many parts of Africa, there's always this issue about dualism and monoism, depending on the way the constitutional framework is structured in a country. That's how you basically implement international treaties. So one thing that countries can also do, even though your constitutional framework might be monoist or whatever, the protocols can be a guide. The protocol can be a guidance for many African states in terms of how to develop or implement the protocol. For example, Section 9 of the South African Constitution provides that nobody should be discriminated against directly or indirectly based on age, sex, gender, religion, social origin, or age. Furthermore, according to Alan Gutterman in his paper titled Human Rights of Older Persons, the South Africans Older Persons Act of 2006 gives effect to the rights in the Bill of Rights included in the country's constitution in respect of older persons, and aims to maintain and protect the status, well-being, safety, and security of older persons. Hence, African states, especially countries that have signed and ratified the protocol, should develop laws on the protection of the rights of older persons in their jurisdictions. It's not just a question of you signing, ratifying. What's next? Have you developed laws? Have you developed mechanisms that we basically localize the ethos, localize the spirit and the letter of the protocol into your domestic or municipal laws? So according to Levitt and Mary, one of their papers, 2009, it said, for human rights treaties to have impact, human rights ideas must be adopted locally, must transform the consciousness of those who claim them and have some institutional fit, so that people who demand rights are at least recognized, if not satisfied. So for this protocol to be very effective, it needs to be transmitted, it needs to be incorporated into national laws. It's not just a matter of ratifying or signing up to this treaty. I think what happens next is more important in my estimation. So it goes on to say that, if you look at the protocol itself, it says that one of the general obligations includes to recognize the rights and freedoms enshrined in the protocol, includes adoption of legislative or other measures to give effect to them, and to include in their national laws as legally binding principles, such as the United Nations Principles of Independence, Dignity, Self-Fulfillment, etc. So it's not just signing to the treaty. African states should endeavor to domesticate, localize, and have national mechanisms to implement this protocol in their country. So lack of political will is a very, very massive issue that has been afflicting the AU human rights system for a very, very long time. So my question is, what is different with the protocol? So I think what we as scholars, we as policymakers, the advantage we have is that we can learn from our mistakes in terms of the African human rights system. So we need to avoid the same mistakes afflicting this same protocol. So Africa is known to ratify, to sign up to loads and loads of treaties. The African Charter on Human and People's Rights is said to be forward-thinking. It's said to contain various generations of human rights. But Africa is still afflicted with human rights abuses every day. So what has changed? Even when the African Charter on Human Rights was actually, when it was just very developed, Africa was in the crux of human rights violations. Africa had loads of dictators at that time. But why did those dictators not come together and say, let us develop the African Charter on Human and People's Rights? Was it just to get external validation? Is this protocol just a way for African leaders and the AU to say, oh, we are ticking the boxes in terms of the protocol and all those other persons? What about the structure? What about the implementation? Is it just a tick boxing exercise, or is it just an opportunity for Africans to take ownership of this process, African states to take ownership of this process, and actually have long-lasting impact on the lives of the other persons living in various parts of Africa? So to me, having a protocol is very, very fantastic. But what next? I think that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Igosa, for rallying us up and challenging to ask what next after the ratification. I want to thank everyone of you for giving us your thoughts as members of the panel, excuse me. Each reflection has brought about different issues, but the interesting thing for me listening in is that a lot of them are speaking to each other. And I'm feeling more and more validated in having this meeting with researchers in the room, the African Commission in the room, civil society organizations working on older persons' rights, governments, because some of the elements that are coming in quite strongly is that all these voices have to work together towards calling for the ratification. Because in that way, if we bring the civil society organizations that then bring the voices of the older persons, then everybody is coming along and it becomes a process that is ours, and then it's not so much a tick box exercise. But these are things we have to think about in developing the strategy in the next session. I think just in summary, some of the strong points that have come from each member of the panel issues around identifying best practice and those states that have ratified or those who have made considerable steps towards ratifying and are just, it's a matter of depositing the instrument. Some of the suggestions to support you in implementing is around looking at what the best practices from other African countries or internationally, and trying to see how those can be incorporated in the implementation of the protocol and domestication in country. There's issues of funding that have been raised by a couple of the panelists, funding to enable the measures to be implemented, funding to capacitate the government actors and other actors who would be involved in making the protocol have practical effect on the ground. A lot of emphasis has been put on meaningful participation in the decision-making, in the process. I believe even just now in what we're about to do or what we're about to start doing, which is putting together an advocacy strategy, is that element of to what extent are we going to be sitting continuously in making decisions without consulting those for whom these decisions will impact. So that also a challenge for us in thinking about the strategies in the next session for how we'll increase the ratification, but not just for the sake of it, ratification that would lead us to adoption of an instrument that is the people's instrument. Sustained action, reporting procedures, that also speaks to the relationship between the Commission, civil society, governments. We've got the space at the AU system that can enable that process to happen. And it's a matter of people taking up their parts and going with it in making the system work. There's issues of telecare. I think with the COVID pandemic, an example is where there was an increase of violence, domestic violence and abuse because of people being stuck in their homes and unable to leave, and built up frustrations. I think what we did see is a couple of governments putting in place measures on their own or in public-private collaborations where they were able to make available online psychosocial support, hotline numbers that women and children, for example, could access, but there was nothing for the older persons, despite evidence that they too, as a marginalized group, were being exposed to increased abuse and violence. I mean, so I think just from that exclusion of older persons as a group in some of the measures that are in place for marginalized persons digitally is something that Philip spoke to and really quite echoes with me. The rights-based approach, I think that's also an important element and something that re-emphasizes why we are here today and pushing for the ratification of the protocol. I think with the legal instrument, it becomes more of a stronger basis for you to try and enforce the rights, you know. So if your country has ratified, then you can make a case in your country that even if you don't have a policy or a legislation, you are bound by these instruments and by these obligations. Yes, so I think with that, I think also Dr. Egosha in finishing us in his final presentation was just raising the issue of the correlation between the ratification, so bringing the instrument into life, giving it legal force, and then with that legal force, then right holders or their representatives can use the instrument to enforce the law in their spaces. So without 15 ratifications, we can't even talk about going to courts to enforce. So the challenge then, that's the link, because if we push for the ratification, then we have the instrument in force, and then we can rely on those provisions to hold states accountable where there's a failure to recognize the rights. So I think with that, just in summary, all in all, it's this call for overall collaboration between the researchers, the activists, the government representatives, the commission, and different elements of this process. So as we're lobbying for and advocating for ratification, once it's in place and it has legal effect, who's going to use it, who's going to enforce it, how we're going to use the African Union systems that are already in place for us to use this instrument to advance the rights of older persons. So I'm going to now open the floor to the participants. Thank you for listening to us go on quite keenly for the last hour or so. We are now going to open the floor for questions for the panel. If you have a question or on anything that the panelists have raised, you would address it to that particular panelist, or if you have a general comment, the floor is open for that as well. If you want to speak to your country context or whatever it is. So the modality for this will be that my colleagues on the back end hosting the meeting will note those who will raise their hands. So you would just raise your hand and on Zoom, and then they will note that you raised your hand, and then they will take 4 questions for every round. And then they will let the speakers know that they can proceed. I think that's understood. So I will Teruna, if you can see hands up, then you can just line up the questions, and then you can let the speakers make their comments. I can see 2 hands up so far. So Teruna, just take note, and then when they get to 4, you can give them the chance.
We also have 2 questions in the chat, Matilda. So the first one is from Mainda Chunga, and the second one is from Mawuko A. So maybe we can count them as 2 of the hands as well.
Yes, so we can take those 2 and make it the first round of questions.
Okay, I think we can start with the ones from the chat. So Mainda, if you could perhaps maybe expand on your question or comment. Okay.
Hello, I hope I'm audible enough.
Yes,
Hello?
I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, correct. Yeah, thanks a lot. Basically, what I was talking about in terms of when we look at the ratification of the treaty for older persons, what I was of the view is that possibly when you look at it, the problems actually might vary across cultures, because I think those are the issues that I was looking at. When we look at it from the African perspective, and also we look at it from other areas, you might discover that the problems that the older persons go through might be different depending on the location. Now, in terms of coming up with the solutions to address those problems, I don't know if we can have an approach where we look at it from the universal point of view, or possibly it has to be looked at it depending on the region where you are, and finding solutions to address the identified problems. I will look at it from my perspective, where I'm coming from, the African aspect or setup. You realize that previously, especially older people who are considered to be part of and parcel of the family, they went through the family. But when you look at it from the other aspect, we used to have older homes, like in the other cultures. It's normal when someone grows old, you take them in an older house where they are looked after, which is really not in our African culture. So basically, we need to look at the interactions of the different factors that have brought up these problems where older people are now being exposed to things like violence, especially from the point of view, you find that like this time I might consider myself the younger person, but the moment I grow old, especially issues to do with witchcraft, you realize that I end up now being considered a witch, and my rights, I don't enjoy them anymore now as an older person, where we have a number of issues where people have been murdered. So these are the issues I'm looking at, especially when we come to the question of domesticating it and into our national laws, because we will need to look at it from different perspectives. How do we address these issues? Basically, these are the issues that I was looking at. Maybe possibly this could be the reason why we are having a situation where not so many countries have ratified and they have just domesticated the treaty. I don't know how people look at it. How should we look at this addressing this problem, especially that the issue itself is complex? I think I end my issue here.
Thank you for that comment. I think it was more of a comment than a question for any panelist, and I'll take it for that. And I definitely from our end, we agree with your perspective. It's quite context specific. And that's why we, again, like to urge you to respond to the survey that the working group and the center have developed to collect information from different countries. So one thing we'd also like to do is to link the campaign of the ratification with an existing issue that a country, for example, is particularly addressing already. So if witchcraft, accusations of witchcraft for older women is an issue in a country, then it's easy to make the connection when you're making the case for the ratification. So again, we'll send the survey, and in collating this information, we hope to make the advocacy plan context specific and responsive to our situation wherever we may be. If your question is for the panelists, if you can just address, indicate which panelist you want to respond to your question. Thank you.
Hello, I concur with you. I think we can still proceed. You can proceed with the next person to ask a question. I agree with the way you've reacted to my comment.
Iruna, will you take another question?
Okay. Can Ansu please unmute and ask their question? I've sent a request. Ansu Bangura. Okay, I think we can move to Edwin.
Thank you. I just wanted to actually carry on from the just asked question. This protocol is sort of old, let us say 2016. And we know many governments have changed. As it is, of course, I am from Tanzania. Tanzania has not ratified it, not even signed, let alone complete the whole process of ratification. But see, some of them are not even aware of its existence. Now, instead of waiting till so late, are there any arrangements where any such document, immediately when it is out, countries should be encouraged to ratify instead of waiting for their own will to ratify such documents? Because I can see if any measures are not taken, this document will stay like this. We have been told that only 2 countries have ratified it. Is that so? So Well, I think we should, this needs a concerted efforts of all stakeholders to ensure that more countries do the ratification so that actually we can reach the number of 15 countries which is required for it to take any hold. Thank you.
I don't know who on the panel would like to speak to measures taken post-2016, just in terms of dissemination and creating awareness of the protocol. Maybe Rosalie? And perhaps also maybe Commissioner Obama might have something to say on this.
Yeah, there have been quite a number of initiatives that have been utilized to communicate with the member states. They've had several not verbal going directly to them. I think through their embassy, representative in Addis, and again, both the Banjul Commission and the AUC through the social affairs have had several, standalone activities that they have used to invite the member states for advocacy work. Even during the development, we had dissemination workshop. They have been written to. I guess maybe there is a breakdown of that, and of course the civil society have also taken responsibility to do the same. HelpAge and its network members at national level and regional level, but also, sorry, the plane was just moving around here, and also Center for Human Rights and a number of other institutions that have come on board. So they've been quite conversations that have been going in and out the country, and what we should try our level best as civil society, the academias, and everybody who may be in touch with the process is actually ensuring that we are reminding them where possible, sharing the not verbals that have been circulated, and the Banjul the AUC social affair has been very good in sharing such, so that we can also relay the same to our member states. So the issue of staying connected, collaborating, interacting is key for us to ensure that our member states have been able to ratify or be aware and also begin their own process of ratification, which is also guided by their own specific laws around ratification or treaty making process that is also envisioned in the government procedures, but different procedures depending on the country you are in. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you for responding to that question, Rosalie. Yeah, so I mean, things have been done, but why we are here on the drawing board and strategizing and getting more intentional about it is precisely because it's been since 2016 without a concerted effort at bringing it into force. So yeah, the challenge is ours. There's another question, Taruna, on the chat about Telecare. You want to take that?
Yes, the question, I think, is a comment from Mamchengu Chavalala, who says that my thinking on Telecare is that it can come as additional support to our older persons to facilitate access to the digital world, which will also include some trainings and sensitization for them to understand and appreciate. I think if Mam Chengu is able to perhaps maybe expand on that, you're able to do so. I've just sent the unmuting request to them.
Okay, let's wait, and in the time being, we can give Commissioner Bomo a chance to intervene.
Okay.
Commissioner Marie, you can proceed.
Merci de me passer la parole, Madame le modérateur. Je voudrais, à la suite de Roselyne, indiquer par ailleurs que le groupe de travail sur les droits des personnes âgées est en, comment je peux dire, campagne permanente. Lors de chaque session ordinaire de la commission, le groupe organise un panel de sensibilisation, d'information et de sensibilisation à la ratification. Et dernièrement, dû au fait que les voyages, les missions de promotion ont été suspendues du fait de la pandémie, le groupe de travail a organisé un webinaire à l'endroit des membres du COREP pour les sensibiliser encore à l'existence et à la ratification de ce protocole. Donc, tout est fait au niveau du groupe de travail, non seulement par mon prédécesseur et par moi-même et toute l'équipe qui m'accompagne, dont notamment Monsieur Bruno Menzan, pour que les pays soient constamment informés et sensibilisés sur cette ratification-là. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Commissioner Bomo, for that. Tiruna, I think we are heading towards our break time, so we'll take 2 more questions, Tiruna, and then go into the break.
Okay, thank you. So one of the questions that was posed was also, what is the difference between telecare and pension already received by older persons?
I think that question would be addressed to Philip.
Okay, thank you for the question, Lifona. There is a difference between pension and the telecare I made mention of. For starters, pension in the African setting is largely not universal. Pension mostly relates to the formal sector, and statistics have shown that many older persons in Africa are working in the informal sector, meaning that they will be disentitled to the pension scheme. So if that is the case, I think there is a need for a universal mechanism to address the digital poverty around older persons. That is why this issue of telecare comes up. So it is different from pension. Even apart from that, I think it is also needful for the ratifying countries to ensure that apart from the pension in the formal sector, there is a universal non-contributory pension for every older person. So you do not need to work in the private sector. You do not need to retire before you are entitled to some social safety net as an older African. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Philip. Tiruna, I think you can take those last 2 hands that have been up, and then we can take our break at 40 minutes past 12. There's
Okay,
2 hands that have been up.
We can start with Mary, and then we'll go to Bokang Kata.
Good afternoon. My name is Mary Kimemia with Equality Now. So mine is not so much a question, but a reflection. And this reflection was prompted by Dr. Ekosa's presentation, where he brought up the issue of COVID-19. So just a way we can think around how to fast track the ratification and just creating awareness around this protocol, which has been rather quote unquote dormant since 2016, is just finding the sensation of the moment, if I could use that term. And at the moment, one thing that is cross-cutting across the continent and across the globe is COVID-19. And the people who are adversely affected, for instance, I'll speak to the context of Kenya, right? The people who are most adversely affected by the virus are the elderly and the older people. And so we bring in the protocol through the channel of healthcare, and also the financial implication. So where we speak about healthcare and providing adequate and just legislating around healthcare for the elderly, we then bring in also the conversation of the financial implication that has faced numerous families, not just for the ordinary citizens of the state, but even statesmen and politicians whose parents and even the elderly have been affected by the virus. And so for us, I would ask us to think around how can we use the sensation of the day to promote and push for the ratification of this protocol. Thank you.
Our last speaker can go, Bokangatla. Are you available to state your question?
Okay, I think we can. He's not. Maybe he's lost. We seem to have dropped him. So maybe we'll get a chance to type his question and we can note it for discussion. I think the last speaker's comments are noted. So just again to go back to the survey that we're going to share with participants. One of the questions there in the survey is, we are asking for information in your context. What issue or what sensation of the day, can we tag onto in advocating for the ratification? So if in that survey we can, get feedback in the Kenyan context, we've had this. Generally there's the COVID issue, but if we can even give more examples or more specific examples that we can tag onto in developing the advocacy campaign together, then that's definitely something that we hope we can consider in pushing for the ratification. Okay, so we are about 8 minutes past time. We are to take a 10-minute comfort break, and then we can resume for the second session, which is the breakaway groups, and where we'll now come up with suggestions or a list of practical suggestions on things that we can do to increase the ratification. So we'll briefly break for 10 minutes. Let's make it 12 minutes. It's now 12:38 on our end, and we can come back at 12:50 South African Standard Time and reconvene for session 2. Before I go, for purposes of our survey, can I just request that participants who hadn't pre-registered, please post your email address on the chat for us to be able to distribute the survey to you. Thank you. So thank you to our panel for such insightful and thought-provoking reflections. And thank you for the comments and questions and active participation. We'll see you shortly. Thank you.